guys, Source20 here and welcome back to Bordertown. I'm pretty sure I end up naming this episode Awful Intersection or at least something to that effect. The reason why I've titled this episode like that is because there's a couple of reasons. First up, this intersection is not a clever intersection in terms of trying to get a good traffic flow in my city. If anything, this just causes more problems, which I actually went into this build sort of knowing that, because the intersection that I do follow quite closely is quite a busy intersection. I did want a bit of a traffic build up. So yeah, this intersection, don't follow this technique if you want to build an intersection and improve the traffic flow, because that is definitely not what's going to happen. And also the way this thing looks, it looks pretty bad. I have to admit, I pretty much just went into this build just thinking, you know what, let's just build something that's pretty awful, pretty problematic for the city, and something that will probably reflect pretty well the type of intersection that I am basically modeling off. So there's this intersection in Juarez, and it is a intersection that is pretty close to the border. There's about 6 or so roads that are connecting up to this one particular point, and at this point there is also a train line that is also connecting up. Now, I am calling it Awful Intersection because this thing is quite ugly looking, but I do love it because this does reflect quite often the types of intersections you encounter when you're traveling overseas, or in countries that, you know, have a little bit more of a relaxed road rule, I guess, setting as, you know, than other countries. Australia is super strict with their road rules, and I've been to a lot of countries that are way more relaxed. I've just come back from China, and I've spent a lot of time in China before, but the road rules are really different over there. And even after 2 weeks or so traveling in China, I still couldn't figure out who had the right of way at intersections with bikes and motorbikes and cars and pedestrians. I just could not figure it out, and all these rules were being broken, you know, right in front of police officers. Whereas in Oz, that would just be, you know, you'd just be copying major fines, just left, right, and center. And you know what, like, even though it might be very different for somebody like me going to a country that has, you know, a very relaxed road rule system, I always marvel at the fact that I very rarely see accidents, you know, while I'm traveling. And, you know, even though there are just like some seriously near misses on intersections like this, yeah, it just seems to always work. Like, it doesn't, you know, everyone seems to obey by, you know, whatever rule is in place on an intersection like this, and somehow it just works. And, you know, the good thing with City Skylines as well is that, you know, cars do just sort of drive whenever they want, and when you start messing with nodes and trying to, you know, create things that are out of the realm of what the vanilla game of City Skylines is working in, you do get cars doing some pretty crazy things, which actually works for an intersection like this. So that's what I'm basically going for in this episode. Don't follow this episode if you want to build something that functions nicely. I do have to admit, I do wish I saw a little bit more traffic banking up around this area, because there are quite a lot of cars driving around, and you can also see that quite a lot of people are still wandering around too, which you know, is really kind of annoying me, because they've got no reason to be walking around. They should be driving. I'd much prefer to see them in cars. But yeah. What I've been doing is I ended up changing a couple of roads that were acting as an avenue. They were roads that were going either way of the either side of the train line. Ended up just deleting them and changing it into a single avenue, and you can actually see the train line going right through the center of it, which actually looks pretty cool. And yeah, obviously the train doesn't stop at this intersection, which probably is a good thing. We probably don't need any more vehicles entering this area. So when the train does go through this intersection, it just clips through a whole bunch of cars, which, you know, I'm not too fussed about. It actually just makes for a much smoother transition across here. And the train is actually super long too, so it actually makes sense that it just does that. Otherwise, there'd be, it would pretty much stop the traffic flow for about 2 or so minutes. The trains are super long. There's about 50 carriages on them, and I've also changed the speed of a lot of the trains to about, 15 kilometers an hour. Something super slow because they are, quite slow trains. But they do only go through every now and again. I've also made it so that they don't, they're kind of infrequent, so you don't really see them that often. And I don't know if you'll see one crossing in this time lapse, but you actually might. Something else that I've been working on is I decided to make this this road go underneath the border crossing. So this is the border crossing into America, into the US side, and I figured that this would make a bit of sense to have a road going underneath rather than connecting up to that particular intersection. At the moment, there's only 2 roads that are going from Juarez and into the US, and I kind of wanted to keep it that way because it does actually make for quite a bit of traffic going across the border, which is quite cool. Makes for some really good cinematics when you see a lot of cars banked up, which you probably saw in the opening cinematics. So I just wanted to keep that a little bit open, a bit of a traffic, keep the flow of traffic quite nice. And the sort of roads that I've been using, these are just streets. I can't remember the person who made these streets. They're a network that are on the workshop, and they work really nicely because they have no road markings, and that just fits in a little bit better with the types of roads that sit within Juarez. I'm seeing very rarely any sort of road markings. To be honest, quite a lot of streets around just anywhere that I'm looking at, in any of my series, I tend to see less road markings than I expect. You sort of imagine that all these roads have all these, nicely painted lines and, indicate exactly what you should be doing and when. But, in reality, that's so rarely the case. And these streets work really nicely. I just wish they were a little bit more cracked up. I did put out I think it might have been a tweet or a shout out in one of the videos just asking if anyone would be interested in creating some more roughed up surfaces for roads. And the response that I got was that there's probably, it's just a little bit too tricky in terms of getting the right textures and making sure that the decals don't look like they're repeating and stuff like that. So these streets work really quite nicely, and I use them all the time in pretty much any of my series. By the way, if you are interested in anything that I'm plopping down or using in this episode, it's all in the description below. There's a full collection that I use for this series. There's about 1,500 assets and mods, which apparently a lot of you guys are saying that isn't that much compared to what you guys are running. But I generally like to keep a pretty low mods and assets, the amounts that I'm using, for a couple of reasons. I mean, it does make for a much shorter load time when I'm loading up the game, but I also much prefer just to use the, rather than scrolling through, huge amounts of assets in my collection, I'd much rather just be using the ones that are a little bit more versatile and specific to the actual purpose that I am building for. So I have pretty much figured out the road layout for this area, and now I'm just detailing the shops and adding in some some details like posters and cafes and like chairs and stuff like that. A lot of markets as well. They add for a lot more realism, and they add so much more atmosphere to this area too. Being such a focal point for this series, this intersection, I did want to make sure that this whole area had quite a lot of detail. If you haven't noticed as well, I am running out of the types of buildings I can use around Juarez. Beard Monkey actually made me a really fantastic collection of Mexican-inspired houses, and they work really nicely around the suburbs, but around the shops and around the commercial areas, I really struggle to find anything. Obviously, this series is wrapping up over the next month or so, this isn't a shout out trying to get people to make some assets for me, but you might notice quite a bit of repetition with the types of buildings that I'm using. Some of you might even see some Osara buildings that I am actually using. They're pretty old. That's Osara was like, a year and 2 years ago, something like that. So it's cool to still see them being used, and actually they're quite versatile in terms of what I can use them for. So yeah, they've been pretty useful for areas like this too. Now I'm just making some more modifications to the intersection. I wanted to cover up a couple of areas that were kind of bothering me because I've moved around the nodes quite a lot using Move It, and I've also changed where some of the roads are. I'm getting a little bit of a glitching effect with some of these roads, so I ended up just covering them up with surface, some of Ronix's surfaces, and I've also used some of these medium props that work really nicely for these areas when your roads don't match up quite as well as they should. Yeah, I mean, it's seamless really. It works quite well, and obviously the ground isn't quite flat, even though I've complained about Bordertown being too flat. Nothing's ever quite flat in this game. Yeah, so some things weren't matching up quite as right, but I don't know, I don't think anyone can even really notice except for me, probably. And now I'm working on an overpass for these pedestrians. This actually works, and you will see a whole lot less people crossing the roads like they are right now. Still seeing hordes of people. Basically, I wanted to create this pedestrian overpass because this is a quite a busy intersection already. So creating a pedestrian overpass just relieves this intersection of people crossing it. And this is actually in real life. This is a an overpass that I noticed when I was flying around this area. It's in a little bit of a different position, and it actually looks a lot better than the overpass that I end up creating. But I was generally going for the same thing, and yeah, it works just as well. Something that I would have really liked to have done is build a get some more billboards to place on the side of it. Definitely ones that were in Spanish and a little bit more Mexican themed. However, the ones that I had created for this series were I guess the type of prop it doesn't really match the overpass, and I ended up just going for the ones that were created that were have the Welcome to Mexico. Not to spoil the ending, but I had some really great cinematics lined up for this episode. Some cinematics where you saw the train going through the intersection, and some night shots and some really great angles. And then it turned out, when I closed the game and started to look at the cinematics and started to prepare the video, I realized that I was actually recording me setting up each frame, and so I was basically recording in the wrong times, which actually happens more than I'd like to admit. So the cinematics are a little bit shorter than usual because I only recorded half of them properly. So sorry about that. I didn't really want to re-record them because I was already really discouraged after totally messing them up, and yeah, I didn't really want to go back and re-record what I'd already recorded. So sorry if I don't really show off exactly all the greatness. You can probably see quite a lot of the coolness in this little area right now. For the last bit of the time lapse, I'm creating some custom poles that are going to be holding up the overpass. The one that I'm copying in real life has so much metal attached to it. I wanted to build something that was quite similar. So I ended up using these metal pylons that were created by Beard Monkey for Osara once again, and they work really nicely. It's something I should probably remember and go back to at some stage. But that is pretty much it for this episode. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you've enjoyed it, don't forget to leave some nice feedback in the comment section, or by rating up this video. It helps me out a whole bunch as well, so thanks for doing that. If you haven't subscribed already, then definitely go and do that so you can be notified when I do upload more videos. But that is it for this one. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one. See you later.